2.
Okay, so I know there's some overlap with X-Files and Lone Gunmen, but Lone Gunmen were obviously introduced in the X-Files. So can you talk a bit about the Jump the Shark episode and the decision behind?
We did an episode of this X-Files episode we did called Jump the Shark was in season 8 or 9. That might have been season 9, and the Lone Gunmen TV series was this glorious experiment that failed. That didn't last past a season, but that was one of my that was such a great job. I enjoyed the hell out of writing for the Lone Gunmen, doing that as a TV series. That was so much fun. And so when it ended, when we did not get renewed after season 1 of the Lone Gunmen, we decided to give the Lone Gunmen sort of a Viking funeral, if you will, and send them out with an episode that was, for all intents and purposes, a final 14th episode of the Lone Gunmen series, although it would have, Mulder and Scully in it. So we did this episode called Jump the Shark, and we got back Michael McKean. Oh, man, what a great actor, and what a great guy. Oh, fantastic actor. We were lucky to get him back. Playing the part of Morris, the character he played was a man in black, and we got him back. And the thing about Jump the Shark that I to this day I regret, I love the guys I work with, Frank Spotnitz and John Scheiman. A lot of what I know about TV I learned from them and working with them. But we had a big disagreement on that episode. They thought the best way to end that episode would be to kill off the Lone Gunmen. And that's what happens in the episode, spoiler alert. But it's like the 3 guys die at the end of that episode. And to this day, I think that was a mistake. They argued their point very passionately and very, very clearly and very, they argue very well. They give great arguments, and they are smart guys who think things through. And they had good reasons for choosing to kill those characters. But and they made their points very validly and very clearly to me, and I ultimately kind of caved in and said, all right, But I think their point was, let's send these guys out in a hero's fashion. Most likely, we're never going to get to revisit these characters after this. We know the X-Files is coming to an end. Most likely, this is the end of the line for these guys. Let's let them go out as true heroes. And I kind of bought that argument. I kind of, but I kind of like the idea that these guys live on forever. I kind of want them riding off into the sunset, not dropping dead, So that episode ends with their funeral, and that I kind of wish I'd fought a little harder on that one. That kind of bums me out that they're dead. Although, in true X-Files fashion, maybe, I'm not sure you ever see their bodies, and there's a funeral at the end, but who knows if the caskets are empty. I don't know. Maybe they're still out there somewhere.
There you go.
Yeah.
The truth is out there. 9/11 changed a lot of television, and specifically with the X-Files. Can you talk about how that impacted the writing staff and the direction the show was going?
God, that was a terrible day. And here we are recording this 2 days before the 10th anniversary. 9/11, 9/11 was something. It was, I remember getting the news that morning. It was my personal trainer called me, and I said, "Oh shit, I'm late for training." And he says, "No, turn on your TV." And I remember Fox being shut down that day. And actually, a weird thing, no one really understood the enormity of how big it was when it happened at first. Obviously, who could understand it, who could get their mind around it. And actually, Frank Spotnitz, my friend, was directing an episode that he wrote that day. And the crew assembled. They were on the set because I think they had started early, and I think they were on the set when the news came that the Twin Towers were falling, and there was they were told initially to keep shooting, and then the enormity of how big this was hit everybody, and the powers that be at Fox called up and said, "Go home, send everybody home," and it should be said, I suppose, that the X-Files was an interesting, the theme of it, the idea of government conspiracy and the government being out to get us, and it could be argued, and probably quite well, that by the end of its 9-year run, the X-Files had kind of outlived that general sense. Now, these things happen in cycles. There may be a day again where, and obviously there's folks of all political stripes out in the world, and which is a good thing. It's good that people have honest disagreements about things. But toward the end of the X-Files' run, it was not a great story to be selling, that the government was out to get us all, when we were at that point under attack from terrorists who hate democracy and hate freedom and hate us and our way of life, and were wanting to kill us all. So it was, the X-Files probably got that theme of that idea of dark government conspiracies that worked so well starting in 1993 was probably not so perfectly timed in late 2001. So probably the best answer to your question of how the X-Files was affected by 9/11, aside from the fact fundamentally how we were all affected by it, which is first and foremost is the best answer. Is the secondary answer would be the X-Files probably seemed a little out of sync with the times toward the end of its run because of 9/11, and
In terms of the long tenure you had on the show and wrapping up some of these unanswered questions with the end of the show, do you think that the show did it the right way? Were there questions you felt should have been wrapped up in a bow a little bit better? Or?
It's damn hard to end any 9-year odyssey of 202 episodes. It's hard to end any journey like that in a perfectly satisfying manner. It's tough. And, I think, a show I didn't mention earlier about how great shows, MASH. I watched every episode of MASH as a kid. I think MASH ended its 11-year run, even longer than the X-Files, more episodes still. I think it ended it in a very satisfying manner. I think that's a rarity. I think most TV shows, especially the really long-lived ones, whether they know the end is coming or not, kind of fall down a little bit when it comes time to end things, because I should say fall down. It's hard. It's damn hard to come up with a satisfying 1-hour conclusion to a previous 201 hours of story. It's just really hard. And MASH is about the only show I can think of that really nailed it. And they did that because they were a great bunch of writers and they knew what they were doing. But also they had a little bit of a leg up in that the whole premise of MASH is we're in the middle of a war. We hate this place. We want to go home. So you've got an ingrained perfect ending that probably everyone saw coming for many years. The Korean War ends, and yet, having said that, they didn't fall down. They didn't drop the ball, and that was a great episode. All of this to say, in my long-winded fashion, the X-Files, probably the last episode was not that satisfying to me as a fan, truth be told, but not for lack of hard work and smart brains behind it. It's a tough thing to pull together, and although I will say, whatever happened, there was a lot of plot machinations in that particular episode and mythology stuff going on, but either that works for you or it doesn't. For me, it was kind of like, okay, all right. But the thing that kind of the saving grace of that last episode, the thing I do think was satisfying, was that last scene. There was a wonderful last scene with just Mulder and Scully, the two most important characters of the show, alone with this child that is theirs. And that was, I think, if the whole last episode was not of a piece completely satisfying, I think the very last scene was. So, you can't ask for a whole lot more than that, perhaps. I should say, now we're talking about 9/11, I should mention the fact that the first episode of the Lone Gunman TV series, which aired about, as I recall, something like
6 months or something.
It was, I think, the first episode of the Lone Gunman, the pilot episode, the first episode aired about 13, 14 months. Maybe it was as much as a year and a half before. But it aired, the first episode, for anyone who hasn't seen it, the plot development in that episode is that bad guys inside the U.S. government, a rogue cabal of bad guys inside the United States government, are plotting to use remote control to fly a 767, or maybe it was a 737, I don't know, but some jumbo jet into the World Trade Center. And that is what the lone gunmen, by the skin of their teeth, managed to avert at the end of the hour. And I tell you, that day when 9/11 happened, it took surprisingly long for that to dawn on me that had been a plot that we'd come up with already. But when that happened, just so many thoughts go through your head. First and foremost, 99% of your brain is taken up with the enormity of that moment and how terrible it is, and all the people lost, and the emotion that goes out. And some little part of your brain, or my brain at that day, was also thinking, Jesus Christ, please don't tell me any lunatic got the idea from an episode of TV I co-wrote. To the best of my knowledge, what I learned about 9/11 since then, these guys were planning on, it seems like a pretty obvious target, hence the fact we thought of it, I suppose. But what's surprising about that episode of TV airing as it did a year or a little more than a year before that terrible event was that this is one of the few times I've ever been, actually one of the few times I've ever brought it up is that or been asked about it or talked about it. I was kind of dreading or worried that we'd get all kinds of calls from the press and whatnot after that episode aired, because I think like 14 million people watched it, something like that. People had seen it enough that somebody somewhere would say to somebody, "Oh my God, this episode!" It's like, but it's funny. It was never. Very few people have ever even brought it up, which I'm grateful for. Anyway, the whole thing, Jesus.
What was the whole premise of Lone Gunmen?
The Lone Gunmen, the premise was three do-gooders out to change the world, out to make it a better place, out to these in the time-honored fashion of muckrakers and investigative journalists, going out there to uncover abuses of power and evil at work and to make the world a better place. And that made it a lot of fun to write for. There were dark conspiracies afoot on the Lone Gunmen, but these three guys, they had this cockeyed optimism and they were fun to write for. Those three guys. Those three characters were fun to write for.
Was it a totally different experience for you writing for that show versus writing for X-Files?
It was similar in a lot of ways, and the Lone Gunmen, by the way, I should say, Glenn Morgan and Jim Wong, writers who predated me on the X-Files, actually created those three characters, and we just loved. I loved writing for those characters in their various appearances throughout the seasons on the X-Files, and I loved writing for them, and I think my fellow writers did too, to the point that around about season 8 of the X-Files, we bugged Chris Carter long enough about it that he finally said, all right, let's go to Fox and let's see if we can do a spin-off series where we give these guys their own show. And it was this great experiment that ultimately failed, but was worth doing, and it was a great 13 hours. Great for me. I enjoyed the hell out of it, Whether it works for viewers or not, I can't say, but I enjoyed the hell out of writing for it. It was a great time.
Do you know why do you think it ended?
Well, mechanically speaking, first and foremost, Fox was not behind it. They didn't get it. The powers that be at Fox were just not into it. I don't know if the three guys were sexy enough or whatever, But they were great guys, and they did a great job. But it just, the thing about success or failure in TV, I guess this could be, a larger point could be made about any endeavor, but certainly in television or movies, it's just timing. Timing is everything. What works one year, we're just talking about the X-Files, and what worked in 1993 would have fallen miserably flat if it had come out on September 12th of 2001. It's the same show, this hypothetical I'm talking about. It'd be the same show, but it would be received completely differently. And in one given TV season, it's a tremendous hit. In another, it's an abject failure. Luck is timing to me, and timing is everything. And perhaps if The Lone Gunmen had come out a year earlier or a year later, or I don't know when exactly, the trick to timing is none of us know exactly when to hit it, But if it had come out at the right time, maybe it'd have been a big hit. That's, I don't know. Drive yourself crazy and not sleep at night thinking about stuff like that, I guess.
What shoulda, couldas, yeah. Just to sum up on X-Files, what to you is the legacy of that show? Where does it stand in the history of television?
I'd like to think people will be watching the X-Files in 50 years. I don't know if that's true or not, but I certainly like to believe it. I'd like to believe the people will be watching it years from now, like we watch the Twilight Zone now, like it's still a part of the culture. It's I'd love to think I had a hand in, I had a part in something like that. It's squarely Chris Carter's creation, and it's his show, but I feel I contributed to it, and I'm proud of my contribution to it, and I'd love to think that it will be remembered as fondly for many decades from now as an integral part of television history. I think it should be. I'm biased as hell, obviously. I'm not an unbiased person to ask because I spent 7 years on it, but it was a great job and a tremendous amount of fun and satisfying on so many different levels, and I'd love to think people will be satisfied by the storytelling in it for years to come.
A show you may or may not have had a hand in now, Harsh Realm.
Yeah, I think I never have looked myself up on IMDb, not because I'm not vain, probably but because I just know it'd be a time suck and I'd fall down some rabbit hole if I were ever to Google myself. It just seems like a bad idea. Not that I'm not interested, but all of this to say, I'm told that on IMDb I'm credited as having had a hand in Harsh Realm, which is not actually true. I don't think I was. I think it said I was a co-producer or something, which I never was. I never wrote an episode of the show. But in the early days, Chris and Frank asked me to take a hand in it, but it just didn't. I was busy as hell. We were all busy as hell. Like those we were all working our butts off. But I was busy with the X-Files, and I kind of politely begged off because I got the X-Files. I didn't quite get Harsh Realm like I got the X-Files, so I kind of politely begged off, and I never really had a hand in the show. But Chris very nicely, in the lead up to the show, before the pilot was shot, Chris very nicely let me go up to the boot camp that they put the actors through. The actors in Harsh Realm got to go through this sort of Dale Dye inspired weekend boot camp where, and I got to join them, and we got to shoot M16s and an M60 machine gun, a belt-fed machine gun, and we got to run around in the woods, and we all looked like a bunch of morons, I'm sure, but it was damn fun. I had a good, kick indoors and sweep a room and all this kind of stuff that I learned two things. The things I learned from it. The one thing I learned is that it kind of helps put you in that mindset when you're writing a scene like that. I also learned that if I had to do this for a living, I'd be dead within 90 seconds, but I would be no good at it whatsoever in real life. But going through those kind of things is exciting and fun. I enjoyed it, but it also kind of helps with your writing. So it's not a bad thing to attempt to learn how to do things, including shoot at other human beings. God forbid I ever had to do it for real. I would not like that. But anyway,
you're prepared.
I'm not even prepared. I'm slightly more. I'm like 0.5% more prepared than I would otherwise have been. But no, I'd probably just run screaming the other way. So
now we come to the show you're currently working on. Can you talk about how you came up with the idea for Breaking Bad, how that was born?
I was about to turn 40 years old. This was in I knew the big 4-0 was coming, and I was God, I wish I remember. I think it was 2005. I was a couple of years away from it, and I was already thinking, oh, Jesus, I'm going to have like the world's worst midlife crisis. So I probably had all that stuff percolating in the back of my brain. And I don't know where the idea came from specifically, but I remember the moment it hit me. I was talking to my buddy Tom Schnauz, a guy I went to NYU film school with, who now is a producer on Breaking Bad and has written some of our best episodes. But at the time he was working, I think he was working on the TV show Reaper, or maybe it was even before that. But he and I both were we had both been on the X-Files together, and it had ended about 3 years prior to this conversation, and we were both thinking, Jesus, you know, it's kind of dry. It's kind of dry out here. What are we going to do next? And we were kind of bemoaning our situation as working writers who at that moment were not working. And like, what are we should do, get in some other line of work while the getting's good. And I think I'd be a good greeter at Walmart. You know, I think I'd be good at that. I'd say hi to people, you know, wave. Talked about, you know, working at H&R Block. And then he said, what about if we just buy an RV, pool our resources, buy an RV and put a meth lab in the back. I think he had read some article prior to that about some guy who had actually done that, and he said, why don't we just do that? And I saw it in the New York Times or whatever, some guy put a meth lab in his RV. Let's do that. And I laughed. I thought it was a funny, obviously he was not serious. Hopefully it goes without saying. But the idea kind of, as we were talking on the phone, just boom, into my head was the idea, was the inspiration, or not the, I don't know what it was, but suddenly I was intensely intrigued, I'm not even sure where it came from, by the idea of a guy who would do such a thing, specifically a guy, suddenly it struck me that what would be interesting to me as a viewer and as a writer would be, what if it was just like essentially me? What if it was, in other words, a guy who's never broken the law, has never, you know, barely littered or jaywalked, you know, never broken the law in any serious way, suddenly finding himself being a meth cook, doing something reprehensible and illegal, and that idea really just boom right in the middle of this phone conversation, kind of hit me full blown, which is kind of rare because ideas usually are much slower in coming. They don't usually come in sort of eureka moments, at least for me. But this was a rare eureka moment where suddenly this character, who at that point I didn't have a name for, but who was eventually going to be called Walter White. You know, this character, this guy, why would he do such a thing? He's doing it for his family. Why does he need to do it for his family? He's got to make some money real quick before he dies. He's got cancer. You know, this whole thing kind of assembled itself together in Lego fashion very quickly and abruptly, and it's a wonderful thing. You wish you, having had very few eureka moments, this one is still very vivid for me, and I wish I had more of them. You know, having a eureka moment makes you wish you had many, many more of them. But this was a good one, and it you know, so that's where the idea came. That's the idea, the moment the idea hit. As to where it came from, I always said, you know, Breaking Bad is about a guy having the world's worst midlife crisis. Of course, in the first episode, he finds out he's not midlife at all. He's right at the tail end of his life. But I was thinking about midlife crises in general and turning 40, and maybe all of that contributed.
Who do you think you were going to pitch this to? I mean, did you have any inkling that this might be a tough sell?
I should have known better. I mean, I've been doing this for a while. In 2005, I've been doing this professionally for like 15 years, and I should have known better. I was so enthused by the idea. I had passion for it. And I was talking about passion earlier. Passion is something that I love in characters that I write for. I love them. I love the passion of the lone gunman. I love Mulder's passion. I think I love it so much I'm attracted to it because I feel sometimes like I don't have that much passion of my own. You know, I'm more of a observer, you know, instead of getting involved necessarily. You know, would that were otherwise perhaps. But at any rate, I was passionate for this idea. And so I did not stop to second guess myself like I usually do, like I will continue to in the future, no doubt. And I had what had happened was Sony Television, the company who's our studio in Breaking Bad. The two guys who run Sony Television, Zach Van Amberg and Jamie Ehrlicht, were guys I had gotten to know because Mark Johnson and I had a deal with them to do about a year and a half before this. We were pitching a pilot, Sony TV and these guys, and Mark Johnson and myself were pitching a pilot to CBS. It was a pilot called Battle Creek, and it was this very mismatched buddy cop show where one guy is this down and out homicide detective in Battle Creek, Michigan, and into his world comes this FBI agent named Milton Bradley, who I love the name of the game company. I didn't realize there was like a professional sports guy named Milton Bradley. It was before I realized that. But this guy Milton Bradley shows up, and he's like this perfect-looking John Hamm type, this FBI agent who can call in like airstrikes and helicopters with FLIR infrared cameras and get the full weight and authority of the FBI behind him, and just everything comes easy to this guy. And the other guy he's partnered with is this hard scrabble down in his luck guy who's insanely jealous of his partner, and they solve crimes together. In the first hour, the pilot I wrote, the first hour, the Milton Bradley guy, who men and women both equally love. Guys want to have a beer with him, women want to sleep with him. Everyone loves this guy, and he's the world's nicest guy, and everything comes easy. And in the first hour, he like inadvertently solves the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa, and so we had fun doing this, but CBS, Les Moonves was not seeing it. And this whole thing went by the wayside at a very late date, not long before we were going to start in active pre-production on it. It went away. But the Sony guys like me. They'd been the studio on that. And Zach and Jamie had said, anytime you got any other TV, we think CBS made a mistake here. We think, we like your writing. Any other idea you come up with, please come to us first. So I took them at their word, and I came in with Breaking Bad. And I remember sitting there in their office and pitching it to them, and their eyes are kind of, at the time I thought their eyes were glazing over with, I will say, I did not, to be fair, I've been to a lot of pitches where I think I was boring people. I don't think I was boring these guys, but they had this look, this faraway look in their eyes of, what the hell is this guy telling us? And as I'm pitching it, I'm hearing myself out loud, and I'm thinking, this is insane. No one's ever going to buy this as a TV show. Anyway, so I go home, they shake hands, and we go home, and I'm like, oh, well, that was a waste of time. And then I get a call from them like a day later, and they say, you know what? This is a crazy idea, but we're into helping, let's do it. Let's try to find a buyer for it. And so those two guys and Mark Johnson and my agent and I went around town to different places. We pitched to TNT. Great meeting at TNT. Excellent meeting. The two executives who I pitched it to were on the edge of their seat. They're loving it. And it was the best meeting, the best single meeting I've ever had, because these two people were they were such good listeners, and they were into it. Or whether they were faking it or not, I don't even care, because they were so very nice about it. They were like paying attention. And then what happens? Oh man! And then what happens? As I'm telling them the first episode. And then he's in the RV, and there's dead bodies. Oh my God! What happens next? And then they looked at each other when I finished. I get to the end, and they look at each other and they say, "Oh God, I wish we could buy this." And they said, if we bought this, we'd be fired. We would literally be fired. We cannot put this on TNT. It's meth. It can't be meth. It's reprehensible. Could the guy, we got to ask half-heartedly, could the guy be a counterfeiter instead? I said, well, no. They said, all right, well, go, God bless you, that was like the best meeting. It's in Hollywood, everyone's always talking about the buy it in the room moment. I've never had that ever in my life in 20 years of doing this. I've never had someone buy a pitch in the room, ever. I don't know that I ever will. I don't much care, just so long as the close second to the victory of someone buying it in the room is telling you in the room they're not going to buy it. It sounds like a bad thing, but it's actually a very good thing. The best thing they can do is buy it. A close second is to give you a quick no. The trouble with Hollywood, movies and TV, is people will leave you dangling on the end of a meat hook for days or weeks or months on end. That happened at HBO. I pitched this thing at HBO, like the worst meeting I've ever had versus the TNT meeting. And it was only like a day apart. We go to HBO, and the woman we're pitching to could not have been less interested, not even in my story, but about whether I actually lived or died. It was just sitting there, just sort of like looking at her watch. And I've got the flop sweat going. And I get to the end of this pitch, and she's got her two junior executives on either side of her who are just equally disinterested. This radiating toxic gamma radiation of disinterest is just like got the flop sweat going on me. I'm just like I'm beating my brains out to get to the end of this verbal pitch, And I get to the end of it, and she's like, "Okay, well, thank you for coming in." and like never could my agents could never even get her on the phone afterward to even say no, because we're walking out. And I said to my agent, Jesus, it's not going to be an HBO show. I know that. And he goes, no, yeah, she's just poker-faced. You never know. And then he couldn't even get her on the phone to pass. So
did that surprise you that HBO passed, though?
No, it didn't surprise me that it passed. I guess my point of my long-winded, as usual, story is that, and not to get too inside baseball about it, but I guess my larger point, if there was one, was that people are not doing you a disservice by passing. It happens all the time. It happens. It's like an at-bat in baseball. You know, you're amazingly lucky in baseball if you bat 300 or whatever, which is, 2 times out of every 3 you strike out. That's the job. That's the job as a baseball batter. That's the job in pitching a TV show or a movie in Hollywood. Most people are going to turn you down. But there's a way to do it that you don't feel like gum on the bottom of someone's shoe. And giving someone a quick no like these TNT folks did is such a sign of respect. It's just basic human courtesy, but it's it's like what we supposedly learn in kindergarten, but it's just like I'd go back and pitch these guys tomorrow. They were so great. I don't care that they turned me down. I mean, I that's their job to parcel out their money and their development money and all that. But they were so cool about it, and they did not leave me hanging on a hook. Anyway, a little bit of advice to any future executives out there. Don't leave people hanging. Give them a quick no. They will not hate you for saying no. They will hate you for never returning their agent's call and never even bothering to say no. They will hate you for that. So
I think that's true in any profession. So
yeah. Oh yeah.
Pay attention.
Words to live by in any profession. Don't think you're going to hurt someone's feelings by turning them down. Just show them the respect of doing it in a expeditious manner.
So AMC, tell us about how did you pitch it to them?
So we pitched all over town. We pitched to FX, who wound up buying it, and they were great. FX was great. John Landgraf and the executives at FX have nothing but respect for them. They actually bought Breaking Bad. And this was, with the show being as dark and edgy and out there and weird, and the hero, as it were, is a meth cook, that's saying a lot that anyone would get behind this. So everlasting credits first to Sony and then to FX and then ultimately to AMC for getting behind this thing. And I think they were serious. I know they were serious about doing it. They wanted to do it, but I think, as with any company, there's finite funds to make TV. And I think the year my misfortune timing wise at FX, although I think ultimately it turned out great. AMC is a great place to be doing the show. But the time when they ultimately bought the script, I wrote it for them. They thought about it for a while, and then they ultimately said, we are regretfully passing. We're not going to be doing Breaking Bad. At the time, I thought my bad luck, at the time, my bad luck as I saw it was, it came from a good-hearted place. It just came from a reality of, I heard at the time FX was making a more active effort to increase their female viewership, and Breaking Bad did not feel like a very female-centric TV show. And so, and also, there's limited funds at any company, and at the time, they also had a TV show called Dirt, which if I was the executives there, I would have gone with Dirt instead of Breaking Bad, because it had a bona fide TV star attached to it, Courtney Cox. Breaking Bad at that point did not have anybody attached. And Bryan Cranston, had he been attached, was not the star in TV that Courtney Cox was. So on paper, FX did absolutely everything right. I would have made the same call as they did. And God bless them that they were big enough to, when AMC came calling, they were big enough to allow AMC to purchase the script for Breaking Bad. I say that because I hope that kind of behavior is kind of rare in the business. Most often it happened with this Battle Creek thing I wrote. A network, most networks, the way they see it, we paid what at the end of the day on the bottom line of our corporate, multi-billion-dollar hierarchy is a pittance. We paid a pittance for the script. We're just going to leave it in a file cabinet somewhere. We're not going to risk letting it go to another company and risk the 1,000 to 1 or 10,000 to 1 or million to 1 chance that this script that we passed on becomes a hit for someone else. That would potentially make us look bad. That's the way most folks do business. FX was very nice of them, and I like I say, every decision they made I think was the right decision, and I would have made the same one, including, I hope, giving up the script and letting someone else buy it. I am eternally grateful to FX for letting AMC buy it. I wish more companies acted in that fashion and didn't worry about, potential illusory possibilities for embarrassment. Anyway, all this to say, AMC, it was done. It was deader than a hammer. Breaking Bad was deader than a hammer at that point, and because FX had passed, and I thought about maybe turning it into a movie script, but then I thought, well, but I don't even own it anymore. FX owns it now. This thing's deader than a hammer because Showtime has Weeds. By the way, Weeds. Oh, I should say this for posterity. Weeds is I did not know Weeds existed when I was pitching Breaking Bad, and I'm so glad I didn't, because it would have stopped me cold in my tracks. If I'd come up with, like, on a Friday, I'd come up with the idea for Breaking Bad, and then on Monday, I'm flipping around and I see we don't have Showtime, so I didn't realize Weeds existed. Also, I think it had just gone on the air, but I'm in a meeting. I think it was at FX. I'm in a meeting pitching Breaking Bad, and I think it was John Landgraf who said, "This is interesting. It sounds a little like Weeds." And I said, "What is Weeds?" And then Zach and Jamie, the Sony guys, said, "Well, Weeds is a show about a suburban woman who sells marijuana." And I was like, and all the blood left my face. I was like, for fuck's sake, why did you guys tell me about this? I'm so glad I didn't know about it, because I would have never, there'd be no Breaking Bad. And we did everything in our power in the early going. The truth is, Weeds and Breaking Bad are completely different shows once you get past the non-criminal selling drugs aspect of both of them. They diverge very rapidly after that. But I would have probably given up at a very early moment in the life of the show if I had known about the existence of Weeds. So there was another point I was making, and damned if I can remember.
We'll find it.
Anyway.
Now, did AMC have any qualifications or notes? Like have him sell cocaine instead, or have him sell?
No, and that was my point that I'd lost track of. Breaking Bad was deader than a hammer. Showtime had Weeds. It wasn't going to buy it. HBO could not have been less interested. TNT, God bless them, that was not part of their corporate mandate. There was no way, shape, or form that it was going to be a network show. We never even pitched to any of the 3 or 4, including Fox, broadcast networks. It would have been a waste of everyone's time involved. So at that point, this thing was, you move on. You pick yourself up and you come up with another idea. But little did I know that my television agent, one of my television agents at ICM, Mark Gordon, not the producer Mark Gordon, but the Mark Gordon that is much, I've never met the other Mark Gordon, but this guy who's very near and dear to me, God bless him for what he did. My Mark Gordon took the script for Breaking Bad that I'd written for FX, and he gave it to the folks at AMC. He gave it to some of the executives at AMC, a woman named Christina Wayne and a man named Jeremy Ellis, and said to them, he knew them, and he said, you guys, I hear you guys are getting into scripted programming. You might want to take a look at this. And he told me this. Mark Gordon tells me, I gave it to AMC. You know AMC, right? And this was long before Mad Men and all. I mean, It was not long before, but I didn't know about any of that. It was before it aired. And he says, I gave it to AMC, AMC. And I said, yeah, the channel that shows like old westerns and Short Circuit 2 and stuff like that, and Schwarzenegger, and which I like. I like all that. I watch AMC, but what the hell did you send it to AMC for? Why didn't you send it to the Food Network? I mean, it's a show about cooking, after all. I just thought it was ridiculous. He said, no, hear me out. They're getting into scripted programming, and they got this thing called Mad Men that they're developing that's going to be on the air next fall or whenever it was. And these guys are serious about getting shows on the air, scripted original programming on the air. Why don't you meet with them? So I said, well, yeah, I'll meet with them. I mean, go to the L'Ermitage Hotel over on Burton Way and sit and go to the bar there and meet with them. And I'm thinking, yeah, I'll get a $14 scotch out of it, because they always buy at these meetings. I'm like, yeah, right on, sure. And I sat down with Christina Wayne and Jeremy Ellis, and they told me how much they enjoyed the script and they liked the writing. And and you've been to enough of these meetings at a certain point. Yeah, that's great. Okay, fine. You like it. That's good. It's never going to see the light. I didn't say this. I'm perfectly agreeable and reasonable, but the whole time I'm thinking, this is just another meeting that will come to naught. But lo and behold, they said, we would like to do this TV show. And, okay, great. And lo and behold, it happened. And Rob Sorcher, who under Charlie Collier, and Ed Carroll and Josh Sapan, great guys all who are still there. But underneath them was Rob Sorcher running AMC at that time. Great guy. I think he's off. He's running the Cartoon Network now. And he said early on, when I met with him later, he said, we really are serious about doing this. And throughout this whole process, I'm waiting very expectantly for the other shoe to drop. Because I know there's going to come a time when these guys realize how much it's actually going to cost to do the show. Or there's going to come a time when someone says, what about the fact your protagonist cooks crystal meth? There's going to come a time where they say, okay, now the meth thing, does it have to be meth? Can it perhaps be counterfeiting money instead? And lo and behold, that day never came. These guys, maybe it's because they were new at it, maybe they were courageous, but maybe part of it was a courage born of innocence. But they were so new at this scripted programming game that they had their courage, the courage of their convictions, and may that never go away. May that never leave them. But the whole way through, I never got the call from them. Okay, now it's time to talk about the crystal meth. Now it's time to talk about the cancer. Cancer is a downer. Now it's time to talk about the fact your star is a middle-aged guy. Can it be a younger guy? Can it be a young hip guy? None of those calls ever came. And not only that, Rob Sorcher at a certain point said, so who's going to direct the pilot? And I already had a mental list going in my mind of directors. And before I could, I'm cogitating them, I'm lining them up in my brain as I'm about to start putting the names out there. He interrupts me and he says, what about you? And I'm just like, I am on candid camera here. This is like, it does not work this way. It does not work this way. This is like a joke. But lo and behold, because you have to understand, if you don't know this already watching, you do not get to direct your own pilot unless you're Michael Mann or unless not certainly if your previous experience directing has been 2 hour-long episodes of The X-Files. You do not get to direct. But lo and behold, they let me direct, and it was a great experience, and I did not, thank God, I did not disappoint them. I'm not saying someone else couldn't have done it better. I'm not saying that not for a second, but I did a good enough job. I'm proud of the job I did directing it, and it accomplished what it needed to accomplish. The show was on the air, and I'm so glad I didn't disappoint them because they gave me so much. They offered me so much in putting the show on the air as it was originally intended, as it was written, and letting me direct it, that it's just, to this day, I'm confounded and astounded and amazed and grateful.
The title. Can you explain the title?
Breaking Bad is an old Southernism. It's an old Southern expression from where I'm from. It means to raise hell. I was down at the saloon. I was down at the bar the other night, and man, I really broke bad. I really, I wound up in the back of a squad car, and I thought everyone was aware of this expression. Honest to God, I did. Actually, Zach and Jamie, the executives at Sony, early on said, we're really digging this except for the title. What does Breaking Bad mean? And I said, I explained it. I said, well, that title's, it's got to go, don't you think? It's not that good a title. I mean, what the hell does it mean? No one knows what it means. And I said, I said, yeah, okay, I'll think of a better title. And I wasn't just shining them on. I meant it when I said it, but a better title never presented itself, so Breaking Bad it is. And I love the fact that, now more and more people know what Breaking Bad means. I love that on many levels, but I'd love to see it be more of a national phrase than just a Southern colloquialism. So.
And why meth?
Meth was the worst way I could think of for Walter White to make money. the methamphetamine really and obviously it dates back to that conversation I had with my buddy Tom, but I think what I keyed off of, reverse engineering it in my brain, I think what I keyed off of when I was thinking of it was, I love the idea. I'm excited about the idea of a guy who's never broken the law, who is a straight arrow guy, who nonetheless starts doing the worst thing someone could do in order to make money. And meth was about it. So that's why meth. It was not a statement about drugs or any of that. If he could have sold arms, maybe I would have gone that way. Some I don't know what, but the thing that was interesting was an otherwise good man doing a reprehensible deed in order to save his family. That was the early impetus, and that's why meth versus even marijuana. There's obviously a definite delineation, I would think, between those two drugs and how badly they impact communities. So.
Yeah, and had you done research, or did you know enough about the physical manifestations of like a meth addict, of like how that would play into the story, the ugliness of the drug?
Yeah, I did a lot of meth. No, I've never actually tried it. Yeah, I mean, my saving grace, I went into this ignorant of a lot of things, ignorant of what it is to be a meth addict, what that world is like, ignorant of what it is to, thank God, to be a cancer sufferer. Ignorant of what it is, from an oncological point of view, ignorant of what it is to be a chemist and a chemistry teacher. There's so many things I didn't know. The chemistry, I kind of bullshitted my way through in the early episodes, but my saving grace as a creator of this particular show is that Walt doesn't know any of these things either. He knows the chemistry, he knows the cancer part of it, but he doesn't know the darker world of criminality that he's entering into. He's very much a babe in the woods, as was I writing it. In other words, so all of that to say, I didn't need to know about meth in a very real sense when I started writing the show. As the series has progressed and as the episodes have played out, I know more about it now than I used to, quite a bit more, from talking to DEA agents and talking to former drug dealers and talking to and hearing from folks and reading books written by former dealers and addicts and gathering up all the anecdotal and experiential evidence I could and information I could. My writers and I have sort of educated ourselves throughout this process, but luckily we didn't have to start at 100% knowledge. We could start at zero knowledge and sort of work our way through baby steps and understanding these things, as does the main character, because we're seeing the whole thing through his eyes.
Yeah, it's true, because in the beginning he approaches it more as an intellectual challenge almost, of how can he make the purest.
Yeah, exactly.
And so he's not thinking about it. Can you flesh out for us, can you define the character of Walter White, and also if you had anyone in mind from the get-go for that role?
Well, Walter White is, I didn't realize all this in the early going. I didn't realize who this character would become, and so much of it is part and parcel is due to the actor playing it, credit to him, and also to my fellow writers who work on it with me. I mean, we've come to realize who this guy is in a way that I didn't know who he was like I do now, in the early going. But Walter White ultimately is a very prideful man. He's a very correct man. I don't mean he's correct in any moral sense. He's very immoral at this point in the show here in season 4. But there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. There's the scientific way. He's a guy, when we first meet him, who wants all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. And he loves science. And he has this great passion for science, but not much of a passion for anything else when we first meet him. He's kind of marking the days and kind of sleepwalking through life, and then he finds out he's got cancer, and then that changes everything. That changes his whole worldview in a very quick second. What I've come to realize about him, he's all those things. I kind of knew most of those things going into it. He's kind of a nerd. He's kind of a nerd's nerd who becomes Scarface. And that was the fun for me. That was the fun in the early going. But what I've come to realize is he's one of the world's most adept liars. And he lies first and foremost to himself. This is a guy who deludes himself at every turn about why he does the things he does, about who he is and what kind of morality and goodness he possesses. This is a man who still thinks of himself as a good provider and a good man. When, now 46 episodes into this series, he's anything but. And that was the point. That's the experiment of Breaking Bad. I think I've said before in other interviews, but the point of Breaking Bad, the experiment, is that it's a show about change. It's a show about transformation and process and change. And it's a show in which our main character, our hero, becomes our bad guy. Our protagonist transforms himself through dint of sheer will. It transforms himself into a bad guy, into an antagonist. And so to that end, you have to be a pretty adept liar. You have to be able to lie to yourself and lead a double life and lie to other people, but lie to yourself as to how good a man you remain after all the terrible things you've done, after all the terrible things he's done.
Mm. You mentioned earlier when you were talking about Bryan Cranston, that episode of X-Files, that there was this sort of humanity exuding from him. And throughout, it seems almost the first episode, the second episode, into the third episode, you still were sympathetic with Walt. But now things have turned, and I just wondered, for you, did you know that going into it, as you said? Did you see that down the road? And is it your intention that this character be at all sympathetic at this point, or are we meant to turn on him?
Well, I going back to that first episode of the X-Files that Bryan Cranston was in, I realized, casting him in that episode, that this was a rare actor who could play a bad guy, and yet you still have sympathy for him. And so I knew we'd need that. I always pitched this show from day one. I pitched to the executives at AMC and Sony that this was a show about a guy who gets worse and worse as the show progresses and gets less likable and less sympathizable. And we have to, if we're going to do this, we have to be courageous about it. We have to let the chips fall where they may. And let's launch ourselves on the right foot by hiring an actor who will remain likable long past the point of good sense. Bryan Cranston has that ability to remain empathizable and likable, if you will, past a point where other actors would no longer remain so. But we got to go forward with courage. And at a certain point, we're going to shake some viewers loose, because the less likable, the more reprehensible this guy's behavior becomes. At a certain point, people will decide, I've seen enough. So that's sort of, in a sense, the point of the show, the experiment at hand. We did our fourth episode back in season 1. I think was a turning point for us, because up until that point, I felt like it was enough that Walt wanted to make money for his family. And there was, in the early going, my writers and I thought, well, it's just going to be really hard to make enough money to leave his family before he dies of cancer. So maybe, he'll have an episode where, he makes some money and then it gets stolen or whatever. There's mechanical setbacks we can come up with. The writers and I can come up with mechanical setbacks that block him from his goal of having enough money to leave to his family. But one of the proudest things I am about the show is early on, it was only the fourth episode of the first season, we were in the middle of the writer's room talking about some mechanical setback Walt would face, and suddenly it kind of dawned on us that we're going about this the wrong way. Walt can't just have setbacks in getting his money. So we actually went the other direction in this fourth episode. We had someone, this Deus Ex Machina, kind of a moment where this rich figure from Walt's past comes to him and says, I heard about your cancer. I heard about your problems. I want to give you money. I want to pay for your treatment. I want to make you whole. I want to make things good. You mean a lot to me. You're a good person. You used to be my partner back in our PhD program. And let me do right by you. This, in a sense, Deus Ex Machina, willfully so. And at the end of that episode of TV, at the end of that hour, Walt turns this guy down out of pride, and he continues to cook meth. So it put the lie to all his protestations of, I'm only doing this for my family, I've got to provide for them. And at that moment happens only 4 hours into the life of the series. And at the time, there was some concern we were giving up too much too quickly. We were making him too bad, as it were, or too, we were making him less than sympathizable at too early a stage. But I'm real glad we did that, because otherwise it would have been some Rube Goldberg device of the week of, I really hate being a meth cook, but okay, I've got $90,000 now. That's good. Oh shit, I left it by an open window and the wind blew it away. It would have gotten more and more mechanical instead of deriving from an innate character trait that this character possesses, an innate flaw that he possesses. So that was like the proudest moment for me on this show, coming up with that. Maybe one of the proudest.
Yeah, it definitely turns the story for a lot of viewers. So with the other roles, did you have other actors in mind, or how did the casting process work? And I have a list of some of the leads to go down. We read some really good actors for Breaking Bad. We read some really good folks. But I always had in my mind from the outset, I had Bryan Cranston in mind, because I thought back to that episode of X-Files, and I realized since that episode how funny he could be, how tremendously humorous a person he was. I realized he was the whole package, and that I thought back to that sympathizability issue in that episode of X-Files, and I realized we had that need here. So Bryan Cranston for me was the guy pretty much from day one. I don't know day one, but I mean very shortly into the process of coming up with a script and writing it and pitching it, I was thinking of Bryan Cranston at a very early stage. But we didn't know we would get him. We didn't know if he was available at first, and we read lots of actors, because you never know for sure. Someone could come into the room and just knock it out of the park. And we read a lot of really good actors who did a fine job, but none of them quite brought to it what I knew Bryan would bring to it. So. Did you worry about the Malcolm in the Middle thing, that's how most people would see him going in, or was that going to help you? Maybe?
I loved it. I loved the idea of Malcolm in the meth lab. I mean, I will say though that feeling was not shared by some of the executives. Christina Wayne, who is no longer at AMC, who is a really smart lady, who was a real asset to that company, I think, and real interesting lady who always spoke her mind and had great opinions. I didn't necessarily agree with all of them always, but I loved that she didn't pussyfoot around. She just planted her feet and said, I think it ought to be this way. I respect that. But she wasn't enamored of the idea of Bryan Cranston. But to her credit, I mean, and to be fair, and a lot of people probably would share this opinion if all they knew of him was the goofy dad on Malcolm in the Middle. That's all she knew him. That's all she had known of him. But to her credit, when I sent along the DVD of that episode of the X-Files, she came around, and as did anyone else who might have had questions. Sony, on the other hand, loved the idea of from day one of Bryan, because they had worked with him not too long before that. I think he'd even directed something for them. But they knew him as an actor. They knew him as a great guy. And they, from a more commercial... In those early days, Sony was the more commercial entity, and AMC was the more artistic entity. And in the early going, Sony, and it was great. It was perfect to have those two sides, that yin and yang, because they melded together very nicely. Because the truth is, you don't want to just do an art house project. You want people to tune in and watch this thing. You don't want it to be just some experimental dance piece or something, on videotape. You want something that you want some meat and potatoes entertainment there, for the masses on some level. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here now doing this interview. The show wouldn't have existed for long. But Sony dug the idea of a well-known face, like a well-known TV dad, and because it is perverse. It's ironic, and it's more than ironic. It's perverse to have this lovable, goofy dad suddenly be this whole different character.
We're gonna break. Oh, perfect.